Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT14, and BT14 gives us lots of new and powerful tools to be able to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be a brand new iteration on the MirageGaogamon deck. So if you're unfamiliar with MirageGaogamon, it is a more OTK combo-centric deck where you want to try to build up your stack and try to blow out the opponent's security with that one stack as best as you possibly can with all of the consecutive attacks that the deck gives you. It also has a little bit of control elements to it as well, allowing you to do some slightly other things in the meantime while you're waiting for your combo, where you have the ability to try to bounce cards on the opponent's field back into their hand and take advantage of the fact that the opponent could have a high hand count and punish them for it. The deck also has more consistency tools thanks to the training cards, so that way we have better searching and evolution options available to us, as well as other things that the deck can do while setting up and waiting for its main combo, giving it more depth than ever before. The biggest weakness to the deck is the fact that it lacks any meaningful protection, meaning your Digimon can be killed by the opponent's Digimon's card effects, or if you're just trying to swing into the opponent's security, if you hit a stray security bomb, then your Digimon is likely to be removed from that security threat, making it more of a glass cannon. Then, because we are a more OTK focused deck, we're not necessarily trying to chip as hard as some other decks could or would, meaning that they could just outpace us if we are unable to find our parts and pieces when we need them. But in spite of all of that, I think that this is one of the better decks coming out in BT14, just because of the slight shifts that the new tools give the deck. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm only going to be running 4 copies of Bukamon because this is the only Digi-Egg we need. We really want to utilize this card because it's an easy way for us to gain access at the jamming ability to try to make our swings with our Digimon, especially on our mid to lower levels, as safe as we possibly can. And the condition for fulfilling the ability to gain jamming is really easy, where the opponent just needs to have a Digimon with less Digivolution sources than the one that we're currently using, and if the opponent has no Digimon on the field, then we still get the jamming ability essentially for free. And then when it comes to the level 3s, I'm running a pretty simple but effective level 3 lineup, where I'm only going to be running 4 copies of the EX4 Gaomon. We're not trying to use his on-play ability to force each other to draw, but it can come up. We're mostly using him for his inheritable ability to be able to gain a memory when a card is added into the opponent's hand, which we could easily do with all of the bounce effects that we're trying to play around with. Then I'm also going to be running 4 copies of Gaomon from BT11 as the deck's dedicated digging or searching tool, where we're just looking for our Gao-based cards, and we're also looking for our blue Tamer, which are super important for how the deck wants to function. And the awkward thing about the card is we do have to trash the rest instead of them going to the bottom of our deck, but that doesn't necessarily matter because we're trying to close out the game as quickly as we possibly can. If you wanted to sub some of this card out and run some floodgates, then that's where I would squeeze in some floodgate space. But outside of that, his inheritable ability is also pretty decent, allowing us to have alternative ways to be able to try to bounce the opponent's low-level Digimon back into their hand. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of the brand new BT14 Gomamon. So even though this isn't a Gao-based card, it's still just really good at making sure that we're going to get a whole lot of value. So at the start of our main phase, we get to trash any one Digivolution source off of one of the opponent's Digimon, which is really good because we could pick certain inheritables that we don't want the opponent to have, while also getting rid of their inheritables to be able to set our Bukamon egg up to be able to give our Digimon jamming. But on top of that, this Digimon can't be blocked for the turn, and this ability does pass through Digivolution, so when we Digivolve up, we're going to be able to make our Digimon unblockable, which is really important at making sure our damage can go through as consistently as we possibly can. Then it also has a nice inheritable ability, which is the biggest pull for the card, is the fact that during the opponent's turn, when this Digimon would be deleted, we get to play a Gomamon from its Digivolution source for free, essentially splitting himself apart, creating an extra body, so that way our Digimon is going to be as sticky as it possibly can, so we could continue to try to go up and aggress. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 4 copies of the EX4 Gaogamon. So the EX4 Gaogamon is the best level 4 for this deck, just because his Wind Digivolving ability lets us bounce it a level 3 back to the opponent's hand, which is okay. We have other ways to bounce, but the fact that we could just bounce while we're Digivolving is really nice, so we could try to fill up the opponent's hand as best as we possibly can. Then the main pull for this card, again, is the same reason why we like the EX4 Gaomon, is because it has that same inheritable ability to be able to gain us memory when cards are being added into the opponent's hand to make us as tempo efficient as we possibly can be. And then the last level 4 of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Lanamon. So even though Lanamon isn't another Gao-based card, she's still just a really strong card in of herself. So she is a hybrid-based Digimon, so that way we could use our Tamers as an alternative way to be able to Digivolve into this Digimon, pushing some extra aggression or trying to build up a secondary stack. Then we also can utilize her Wind Digivolving ability to try to rig our inheritables when we're Digivolving up into her by allowing us to place a blue level 3 from our hand to the bottom of its Digivolution source, and one of our blue Digimon gains the jamming ability for the turn. So if we don't have our egg set up, then she can have an alternative way at being able to give us jamming to make our swings as safe as possible. And then when it comes to the level 5s, I'm going to be running 1 copy of the EX4 MirageGaogamon. So unfortunately, EX4 MirageGaogamon was limited to 1, which is why we can only run it at 1 because of how good this card is. So his Wind Digivolving ability lets us bounce a level 4 or lower back into the opponent's hand. So again, just more bouncing allows us to be extra tempo efficient, especially with the rest of the EX4 line. Then his inheritable ability is the biggest pull, and the biggest reason why he got limited is because it's one of the easiest ways to be able to unsuspend our Digimon to gain extra attacks when we attack with our Digimon, because if the opponent has 8 or more cards in their hand, then we get to unsuspend this Digimon, allowing us to pick and choose when we want to utilize this ability and how we want to utilize this ability. But we're still going to be wanting to run some other Gaogamons, so I'm going to be running 4 copies of the BT11 MirageGaogamon. You could easily run the BT13 MirageGaogamon if you wanted to in its place. I do just value the different levels of usability that the BT11 MirageGaogamon gives us, just because when we Digivolve up into him, we're going to be gaining the blocker ability for some potential defensive lines of play, while also getting plus 2,000 for every 4 cards in the opponent's hand, so that way we can actually make our Digimon pretty big at walling the opponent out or trying to get around specific high-level Digimon. And then he has a nice inheritable ability that we do have to time properly, where during all turns, when an effect adds a card to the opponent's hand, then we're going to unsuspend this Digimon. So usually before we go up into our level 6, we're going to want to attack with our level 5, and that's why jamming and the DP boost is super important to make sure that our Digimon has as high of a chance of living as it possibly can. So when we go up into our level 6, we could use the inheritable ability to be able to get that unsuspend to continue the aggression. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Zudomon Ace. So Zudomon Ace is just the deck's Ace card. It's a very easy level 5 Digimon for us to want to hard play, but if we want to Digivolve up into this card, just because we don't have any other level 5s, it's still a pretty solid card to use in of its own right, just because we get to trash any 2 Digivolution cards from the opponent's Digimon, again getting rid of those problematic inheritables, while also being able to return the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources back into their hand, which again we're trying to bounce cards into their hand anyway to fill up their hand as best as we possibly can, making it so that this card can do everything we want it to do, having a whole bunch of other ways to be able to utilize it because it is that Ace Digimon. And then when it comes to the level 6s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of MirageGaogamon from BT11. So this is going to be the main level 6 of the deck and one of the strongest cards in the entire deck just because of how good this card is. So when we Digivolve up into him, we get to bounce a level 5 or lower Digimon back into the opponent's hand, and if no Digimon was returned to their hand by this effect, then we get to add the top card of the opponent's security stack to their hand instead, so that way we're always bouncing a card back into their hand. Ideally, we want to bounce the card from their security to their hand so that way, A, we're burning their security, and that's one less security that we have to deal with, and to B, to try to add cards into their hand to trigger some of our various other card effects. Then his All Turns ability is especially potent because when an effect adds a card back into the opponent's hand, we get to gain 1 memory for every 4 cards in the opponent's hand. So if the opponent has a nice large hand size, then we're going to be gaining a lot of memory, making him relatively cheap, level 6 for us to use. And then I'm going to be running 1 copy of the BT14 MirageGaogamon, just because this is still a pretty decent card. We just don't want to see him as often as the BT11 one, just because the BT11 one is obviously stronger. So the BT13 one does have Evade, which is a form of protection, which is really nice, but he also has a nice Wind Digivolving ability to be able to return the opponent's Tamer back into their hand, which the game doesn't have a whole lot of Tamer hate and removal, so the fact that we have one is still really nice and relevant. Then he even has a nice All Turns ability that's also triggering when cards are being added back into the opponent's hand, where we get to play a Tamers from our hand for free, so he's just one of the deck's best ways at trying to set up our Tamers. And then when it comes to the level 7s, I'm going to be running 3 copies of MirageGaogamon Burst Mode. So MirageGaogamon Burst Mode is the win condition for the deck because this is what's allowing us to try to deal as much damage as we humanly possibly can. He has a nice alternative Digivolution condition of Burst Digivolve, where we could Digivolve him for free on top of a MirageGaogamon by bouncing a Tamers back into our hand. Then, unfortunately, if we do Burst Digivolve, then we do de-Digivolve the Digimon at the end of the turn, so we do have to keep that in mind on the fact that when we do want to go up into Burst Mode, we usually want to win that turn. But it's not like it's that bad, just because it's a free evolution to try to help us push that aggression. And he has a nice Wind Digivolving ability where we get to return one of the opponent's Digimon back into their hand. This is a really good control type of effect, and it's trying to add more cards back into the opponent's hand. And then we get to gain 1 memory for every 4 cards in the opponent's hand. So if we Burst Digivolved him for 0, bounce something back into their hand, then we're going to be actually gaining memory, and that's how we want to try to set up our Tamers back onto our field, so that way we could then use our Tamers to combo with our MirageGaogamon. But his when attacking ability is still just really strong at being able to grant us those extra attacks, because it's not limited to once per turn, and if the opponent has 9 or more cards in their hand, then we get to choose cards from the opponent's hand at random and return them to the bottom of the deck until they have 8 cards in their hand and unsuspend this Digimon. So not only are we then trying to pick apart the opponent's hand, but the unsuspend is what's letting us be able to multi-attack, and because we could add a card back into the opponent's hand, making sure that they have 9 or more, that's where the extra attacks come into play. And speaking of our Tamers, I'm only going to be running an all Tamers lineup. So we don't need Nikolai because Nikolai wasn't really doing anything super relevant or meaningful for the deck outside of giving our Digimon jamming, but because our Egg does that, it frees up deck space to run various other cards. So I'm going to be running 3 copies of the BT13 Tamers as the deck's dedicated memory setter to make sure that we always have memory to be able to play around with. And then we could use this in combination with a lot of our Gao-based cards to be able to make sure we're constantly adding cards into the opponent's hand and gaining various abilities for doing so, while also adding to our own consistency at the same time. Then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of the BT4 Tamers. So this is another really decent card just because it's a slightly cheaper Tamer for us to play. It has a nice on-play ability to draw a card, so it's essentially replacing itself. And then on top of that, it's also giving us the ability to unsuspend our Gao-based Digimon if the opponent has 8 or more cards in our hand, so that way we could gain extra attacks with this card as well. And then when it comes to the options, I'm running a pretty simple but effective option lineup, where I'm going to be playing 4 copies of Mental Training. So Mental Training is going to be one of the best digging tools for this deck, just because we get to reveal the top 2 cards of our deck and add any blue card from among them into our hand, and then the rest go to the bottom, setting this up into the battle area for its main ability of Delay to basically reduce the cost of the next Digivolution by 2, so that way we could try to use this to Digivolve cheaply and efficiently when we're trying to make our big push turn, while finding the parts and pieces that we need for that push turn to begin with. Then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Blue Memory Boost as just another consistency tool. This time it's allowing us to check the top 4 for only blue Digimon, but our blue Digimon are still important, and we still want to try to make sure we can find what we need while setting up for the delay ability to gain 2 memory at a later turn, so that way we have the difference between cost reduction and memory gaining to be able to do lots of various different things with. And then as far as the removal option for the deck, I'm just going to be running 2 copies of Full Moon Meteor Impact as just one of the best removal options currently that blue has access to, by bouncing one of the opponent's Digimon back into their hand and then gaining a memory for every 4 cards in the opponent's hand, so that way we could try to make this card as cheap as we possibly can compared to a lot of the other blue removal options. But that's pretty much it for the deck, and it changes enough with some of the cards that BT14 is already offering us. We do have lots of other different tech and tools that we could play inside of the deck to be able to customize it to not only just fit the meta, but fit your own personal play style and preferences based on what you have access to and the expected meta you're going to be playing against. And then as far as some future support goes, well, unfortunately, there's not going to be any future support as far as what we know of, which is all the way up to BT15. So once you're done building the deck, that's kind of it, and it's up to you to be able to tech based on the tools that you have to be able to handle what the meta is going to be throwing at you. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.